Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you
Hello and welcome to Self-Inflicted Aural Nostalgia, the Guided by Voices podcast. Every GBV LP, every 2 weeks, for at least 2 more weeks. After Space Gun, hey, you're on your own. My name is Jeff Gomez, and today we're looking at the first of 2 records to come out in 2017, double LP, August by Cake. But first, as usual, all music heard in this podcast is played and owned by Guided by Voices. Any reviews or materials cited are owned by their respective creators. And, of course, many thanks goes out to Jeff Warren's Guided by Voices database, which is just waiting for you at gbvdb.com. Go to my site, everygbvlp.com, to subscribe to the few remaining future episodes or to listen to all 22 past episodes plus all the bonus episodes. And, of course, you can always drop me a line at jeff@everygbvlp.com. I also mentioned in the last episode that when the series wraps up after Space Gun, I'll be releasing a free Guided by Voices tribute record called How Do You Spell GBV? Well, today we'll have yet another world premiere, so stick around until the very end to hear the GBVBs by the Kyle Sowashes. Now let's get to the show. Quadrophenia, The Wall, Physical Graffiti, The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway, August by Cake? Yes, they finally did it. Guided by Voices, with their first of 2 records from 2017, partook in that most hallowed of rock and roll traditions, the double record. It's something that, surprisingly, had never yet happened despite the thousands and thousands of songs Pollard's written over the decades, not to mention all the previous LPs that had been double records during the planning stages. And yet, here it was, after all that time, 4 vinyl sides of new Guided by Voices goodness. And even though Bob had flirted in the past with the idea of a concept record, whether it was the aborted Power of Suck or the supposed narrative of Mag Earwig, August by Cake had more in common with London Calling than Tommy. There was no overarching story and no grand vision other than a whole lot of kick-ass music. 32 songs, clocking in at an hour and 11 minutes. It is, of course, the band's longest album, pushing 15 minutes past the 55-minute running time of the 24-track Under the Bushes, Under the Stars. And while previous GBV albums like Alien Lanes and B1000 had been compared to crazy, cult-like records such as the Beatles, aka the White Album, sprawling double LPs that covered a dozen different styles and twice as many songs, here GBV finally delivered the real thing. And while some modern-day alternative or indie rock groups have produced double records in the past couple of years, Flaming Lips, Arcade Fire, and Ryan Adams among them, it's an art form or expression most often associated with classic rock bands from the 60s and 70s. However, as a format, it stretches back to the 50s, with releases like a Carnegie Hall concert by big band leader Benny Goodman being released all the way back in 1950. In terms of the rock and roll era and the double record as an original artistic statement, most people think that Bob Dylan's Blonde on Blonde was the first double album. But actually, the first double LP released by a rock band was Freak Out by Frank Zappa's band, The Mothers of Invention. Freak Out, which was also the debut release by the group, beat Blonde on Blonde to market by about a week. Rolling Stone called the appearance of these records a historic moment, because while the Beatles, along with Dylan, had proven the artistic value of the album, they were no longer just 1 or 2 hit songs along with a bunch of other random tracks. The double LP allowed artists to not only express themselves over a large number of songs, but also allowed them to write longer songs. Think of something like Dylan's 11-minute Sad-Eyed Lady of the Lowlands. And while this would, in the 70s, lead to prog rock excess, with bands having long jams or song suites that took up an entire side of a record, in most cases, double LPs just meant a whole lot of songs, and that was not always a good thing. In The Telegraph, when looking at the reissue of a double album by Led Zeppelin, Neil McCormick wrote that, "Doubles too often prove to be acts of creative hubris, exposing the limitations of an artist's ability, an egoistic failure to comprehend that not every single note they play deserves to be heard." He sums up the problem with most of these kinds of releases by asking, what do most double albums lack? An editor. And while Pollard's been accused on numerous occasions of not having an editor, I don't at all feel that August by Cake suffers from having too many songs. And whereas I would have gladly removed 3 to 4 tracks from each of the reunion records, and I advocated in my Alien Lanes episode for removing about half of the album's songs, here, sort of astonishingly, pretty much all of it works. It's just a great ride, and while it could have been giving some of Pollard's worst propensities, indulgent or half-baked or just plain bad, August by Cake is none of those things. Instead, it's just an absolutely kick-ass record that I would personally place among my top favorite GBV albums of all time, rubbing shoulders with B-1000, Propeller, and Isolation Drills. So how did GBV pull this off? Well, the answer is simple. Bob had put together a really powerful new band, each of whom were talented songwriters in their own right, and they started working with a really great engineer in Travis Harrison. The band who recorded the album was the same one that Bob had put together for the Please Be Honest tour. And whether or not this was part of his plan all along, he was shrewd in the construction of the group since each of the members could sing and had fronted bands or contributed songs to prior groups. In this way, at least for August by Cake, GBV became almost like the new Pornographers, an indie rock supergroup consisting of a number of talented songwriters, with each of them taking their turns at the mic. Not that Pollard ever really meant for that to happen. As Doug Gillard says, it was initially just a batch of songs for a new album, but at some point, Bob decided it should be a double album, and we set out to do that. I originally intended it for it to be a single album, Bob said. I had 17 songs ready to record in New York with the band, but then I recorded 6 songs at a studio in Dayton that I really liked. So then I had too many songs for a single album and not enough for a double album. I asked each band member to write and record 2 songs each, which they did, and they were all really good songs, so that's what made it work. This means that the other guys only had a few days to record and, in some cases, write their songs. Bobby Bare Jr.'s High Five Hall of Famers was pretty much written on the spot, Bob wanting the song almost immediately. Such a short deadline meant that the band members pretty much recorded their own songs all by themselves. As Gillard says, we didn't plan it this way, but each one of us plays drums on our songs. Bassist Mark Shue played drums on his songs, Bobby Bare played drums on his, myself on mine. We all pretty much did everything on our own songs, so it's a very diverse record that way. And it's the strength of that diversity that goes such a long way toward making this such an amazing record. I've said in prior episodes that as much as I love Bob and his songs and his voice, I've also really appreciated when Tobin Sprout's sprightly tracks were interspersed with Bob's heavier material. Well, here there are 4 different voices in the mix, and not just 2. That's not to say that Pollard's not contributing a lot of songs as well. Taking out the 9 songs written by the other band members and 1 co-write between Bob and his brother Jim, that leaves a whopping 22 songs written by Bob for the album. And while plenty of other GBV LPs had featured lots of songs, Mag Earwig has 21 tracks, Under the Bushes has 24, and Alien Lanes featured a whopping 28. Each of those songs had either a few Tobin Sprout songs or else there were tracks that Bob co-wrote with Toby or someone else from the band. In terms of GBV, this is the most tracks Pollard had ever written for a record, and in terms of his whole discography, I think only his solo record, also a double LP, From a Compound Eye, contains more songs penned by Pollard, with Bob getting solo credit on 24 of the album's 26 songs. And it has to be said that of Pollard's 22 songs on August by Cake, pretty much all of them are good. I mean, this is a very, very strong record in both its sound and compositional content. Bob and the rest of the guys were really firing on all cylinders, and frankly, with How Do You Spell Heaven and Space Gun also being super solid LPs, they remain in that zone. It's pretty remarkable to me since just a few years prior, GBV was putting out records like English Little League, which I admitted was my least favorite album by the band. And the fact that this same lineup is still out there touring and putting on amazing shows, and 2 more records have been announced by Bob with this same group of guys, Zeppelin Over China, coming out in 2019, and Street Party, coming out in 2020, the band shows no sign of slowing down. It is, I would say, the best time to be a fan of the band since 1994. Another secret weapon of the group, and something that's greatly contributed to the success of this and especially the next 2 LPs, has been the addition of Travis Harrison as engineer. After making records for over 30 years and with some good and bad experiences behind him, Pollard didn't really need and wasn't looking for a producer. He's past the point where he needs someone telling him to write a chorus or a bridge or to make it longer. And since the current band is so tight and talented, he really doesn't need someone telling them what to do either. The only thing missing was an engineer to capture the sound of the band, not to mention achieve the little touches that Pollard sometimes wanted to be conveyed in the tracks. That missing piece was Travis. Harrison was already a GBV superfan, something he admitted to Doug Gillard when Travis's band at the time, the Unsacred Hearts, played with Doug's band at pianos in New York City. They kept in touch, and Harrison later asked Gillard about Lifeguards, the Pollard-Gillard side project from 2003. Gillard and Bob were both open to doing another album if a label was interested in releasing it. Well, Travis offered, "I have a studio, a label, the recording skill set, and I'm a huge fan. Let's do this." Bob and Doug went for it, and Travis not only engineered and released the record, 2011's Waving at the Astronauts, but he also played drums on 5 of the songs. Harrison's studio, Serious Business, which is also the name of his label, was founded by Travis along with his friend Andy Ross, the guitar player in OK Go. It was initially located in Long Island City before relocating to a loft in Williamsburg, Brooklyn. Pollard later worked again with Harrison for 2016's stellar ESP Ohio album, Starting Point of the Royal Cyclopean. Harrison not only engineered the sessions, but played drums in the entire record. And with Doug Gillard on guitar and Mark Shaw on bass, you can see the new lineup of GBV beginning to form. Harrison also travels with the band and does their sound, so he's also responsible for their ferocious live sound. Something else that made August by Cake special was that it was Pollard's 100th studio record, so it made sense to honor that occasion with an extra special release, which the band certainly did with this album. And while I've talked before about the danger of championing quantity over quality, keep in mind that Joy Division only ever released 2 studio LPs, and yet they're much more popular and influential than GBV. But no matter how you look at it, releasing that many albums is an amazing achievement. Rockathon celebrated this milestone by releasing a handsome hardcover book entitled 100, which reproduced all 100 sleeves, front and back. It's a super nice package and a must for any fan. And in case you're wondering what those 100 records is comprised of, newspaper The Oklahoman figured it out. Nathan Pop writing, "Here's the math. 25 Guided by Voices albums, 23 solo Robert Pollard albums, 14 Circus Devils albums, 5 Boston Spaceships albums, and 20 plus other side projects, some of which issued multiple LPs. That's not even counting live albums." That's obviously a whole lot of stuff, prompting Pop Matters to write that, at this point, it's best to think of Pollard's discography as a raging river. Jump in and hold on for as long as you can handle it. After the somewhat curious album, Please Be Honest, which confused critics and fans alike, who wondered whether it was really a GBV record or just a solo LP in disguise, August by Cake received pretty much positive reviews, with critics glad to see the band back in operation and operating at full force. Pitchfork gave the review a 7.1, praising the album's sequencing and declaring it free of what it termed Pollard's typical filler. Noted author Nicholas Carr, author of a very fine book called The Shallows, wrote on his blog Rough Type that August by Cake is the most approachable Guided by Voices record since 2001's Isolation Drills, the most relaxed since 1995's Alien Lanes, and the most topical ever. Robert Pollard once divided humanity into 2 camps, sad clowns and happy motherfuckers. He confessed in the former category, but he envied those in the latter. August by Cake is a happy motherfucker record, but it's shot through with a sad clown sensibility. And while Pop Matters declared that the album fails in terms of it being the crown jewel of Pollard's career, describing it to be more like a chest overflowing with strange baubles, memories, and mysteries, it also noted that the LP contained many brilliant, beautiful moments. The AV Club gave the record a B, citing that the music barely hangs together at times, but the potential for the roller coaster to go flying off the tracks is, as always, part of the fun. Website Under the Radar, giving the album an 8 out of 10, proclaimed that the album is so strong that it's possible had this been released instead of B1000 at the time, it would have had the same impact. A curious thing about the LP is that no singles were issued either before or after the record was released. And even though each of the reunion records from just a few years prior saw multiple singles, Motivational Jumpsuit alone saw no less than 5 7-inches. August by Cake, the same as Please Be Honest, stood alone as an album. However, a video was made for one of the LP's 32 tracks, with Planet Score and Bad Love Is Easy to Do director Mike Postolakis asked back to direct his 3rd GBV video and 4th overall for Pollard, since he also directed the clip for Rick Goodwicki's Poor Substitute. This time around, Postalakis took a more documentary approach, shooting in and around Dayton in an homage to Pollard's hometown, not to mention recreating various iconic shots from Watch Me Jumpstart. A bunch of footage was also shot at Rockathon Records with Postalakis and pal Kyle Sowash from the very fine group The Kyle Sowashes, who you'll hear from later, holding up various bits of Pollard merchandise. It's a really great clip, serving as not only a wonderful visual postcard for the new album, but it's also a great testament to Bob's achievements over the years, which is fitting given the importance of August by Cake in Pollard's discography. The album's cover is interesting because it was the first LP since Sandbox to feature an original photo and the first since the TBT releases to be just a photograph, rather than some sort of Pollard collage. And even more interesting, the cover is not a photo of Bob. That being said, he would be in the next LP, which appeared later the same year. Instead, the cover star, if you will, was new bassist Mark Shue. And what Shue's doing is drinking a beer by using what's been dubbed the Calgarian method, which is something Pollard came up with after a show in Calgary. He said to the band, taking a sip using both hands and with his fingers holding the neck of the bottle with his scissored fingers, "Man, I bet this is the official method of drinking beer in Calgary." Well, that caught on as an in-joke with the group, and over the next couple of months, they'd send photos of themselves employing the Calgarian method to each other. The shot that became the LP's cover was taken by a friend of Shue's named Aaron Weckerly, an accomplished visual artist from New York. She and Mark were having dinner at a Vietnamese restaurant in Brooklyn when he requested that she snap a picture with her iPhone of him drinking via the Calgarian method. Mark sent the photo to Bob, who, just a few days later, decided to use it for the cover of the album. I sent Erin a few questions about the shot, which she was kind enough to answer. I'll post them this week on the Facebook page. But now, take a deep breath as we dive into the feast that is August by Cake, track by track. The record kicks off with 5 Degrees on the Inside.
The city of oil, the ozone never came, just as unfortunate, the sweet spot let out.
First off, preceding the song is a bit of spoken word by Bob where he announces, "Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you August by Cake." You'll recognize it as the little bit that I also used to open this podcast. Author Nicholas Carr describes this as a circus barker's come on, a brassy fanfare. The curtain rises and the show begins. The circus theme is interesting to note since there are other circus references on the record. For example, the songs Upon the Circus Bus, Circus Day Holdout, and Amusement Park is Over. References like this can be found throughout GBV history. Think of the art for the early LP, Same Place the Fly Got Smashed, which was rife with imagery of clowns and the big top. Pop Matters, though, tied this to another record that opens with a similar sort of fanfare, writing that 5 Degrees on the Inside is a song that also has a bit of regal procession to it in a Sgt. Pepper's way. The same way that the opening track on that seminal Beatles record invited the listener to sit back and enjoy the show, Pollard's here doing something similar. And just like that opening track on Sgt. Pepper's, this is a super fun and effective song that kicks off the album in a really great way. One of the things that really helps sell it is the use of a trumpet. Again, GBV is usually thought of as this all-out rock band, so I like these moments when they add in bits of, what is for them, unusual instrumentation. The trumpet was played by Dennis Cronin, a New York City-based musician who's also played on the ESP Ohio record. In addition to playing on LPs by indie bands such as Lamb Chop and Yo La Tango, he had his own band, Vitamin D, and he also had a podcast called Trumpet Moments. Pollard and the rest of the guys also sound great on this track. There's a really nice bass line, a melodic twin guitar attack, and the drums sound amazing. There's even some hand claps which add a lot. Plus, Bob has a very clever line when he writes, "The sweet spot bled out to stain your life." That's pretty much genius. It's just a great song. I think it's one of the best on the record and one of the strongest GBV opening tracks ever. Second song on the first side is Generox Gray.
Starter, you can do it.
After the fast tempo of the opening song, we get this slower sort of down-tempo track. This reminds me of another great double record, the White Album, which opened with the blistering Back in the USSR and followed it with the slower Dear Prudence. It's a bit more lo-fi than a lot of the tracks on the record, but it still sounds pretty good. It actually reminds me, sound-wise, of the song Pencil Rain by They Might Be Giants. Lyrically, the track seems to be a commercial for a make-believe product, something called Generox Grey, which can help you, as Bob writes, complete the transition on your most sensational day. This is very much the Pollard of Useless Inventions, where he decried mindless consumerism. Here he's saying that you not only buy this thing, but you take the oath. It's more than a product, it's a way of life. Third song on side 1 is When We All Hold Hands at the End of the World.
Display our emotions of anger and fright. Birthplace to be and the best place to fight. But most of us have to be home by 10.
This track, which is a reworking of Home by 10, which appeared in a much faster version on Suitcase 2, shows what a transitional record this was for the band. Even though Pollard had put together this amazing group of talented musicians, they really wouldn't begin appearing on every track until the next LP. Instead, August by Cake featured some full band stuff, some stuff Pollard had recorded on his own, and then, of course, the tracks that the new members recorded playing and singing their own songs. In fact, this track actually reminds me a lot of the previous record, Please Be Honest, with this song being sort of a slower Kid on a Ladder. It was even recorded at the same studio, Cybertechnics. It's a fun song, with the final line and image of everyone standing and holding hands at the end of the world, being both a warm nod to solidarity and a chilling reminder that everything could just all disappear. The next track is Goodbye Note.
I'm leaving. Don't interpret it wrong. And don't worry.
This Doug Gillard song is the first track in the LP not written by Bob. It's a super fun and strong track, once again showing what an asset Gillard is to the band. He's not just a really great guitar player, he also has a cool voice and he knows his way around a good pop song. Don't forget that he's the one who wrote I Am a Tree. The subject of the song, the heartbreak that comes with having to temporarily leave someone you love, has long been a subject in pop music, whether it's Leaving on a Jet Plane or Kiss's ballad, Beth. Goodbye Note seems more tied to the latter than the former, since it's written in the voice of a musician who's leaving, most likely, to go on tour. And whereas in the Kiss song, Peter Criss sang, Me and the boys are playing and we just can't find the sound, Gillard here suggests putting the object of his desire into a carrier so he can take them to the shows. It's a pretty funny line. This is then followed up by Gillard writing, What you think is not work is work, the insiders know. This is a sly and subversive argument for the rock and roll lifestyle and not having a day job. Because Doug seems to be saying that if you work in an office or sell cars or something similar, that job is you even when you're not at the office and you're not doing it. You carry it around in your heart and your head, even when you think you're supposedly off the clock. Another fun thing about the other guys in the group writing songs for the album is that they often played these songs live. This track was performed almost 24 times on the subsequent August by Cake tour. And the same way that hearing the other guys' voices gives this record diversity, these tracks perform the same function in a live setting. It's also just cool to see Doug or Mark take the mic and have a chance to shine. It's also refreshing to see that Bob's willing to give these guys a few moments in the spotlight. Plus, it's just fun to see Pollard by the side of the stage rocking out or providing background vocals. He becomes, in those instances, just like us, an audience member enjoying the band. Moving on, it's We Liken the Sun.
We liken the sun to lightning.
This track starts out sounding a bit rough and lo-fi, but by the time it's over, it's a really gorgeous song. With all the guitar work in the background, you begin to realize how much Doug Gillard's been missed on the past half dozen or so records. In keeping with the circus theme that creeps up in the LP, the lyrics mention the Boardwalk Clowns. Pollard then lists, in addition to clowns, saints, giving an already heavy and pretentious song religious overtones. And since the final line includes burn your face with your gun, we're back in end of the world territory. It's certainly a long way from Chasing Heather Crazy. Side 1 starts to wind down with Fever Pitch.
Seeds in jealous sun. Draw attention to the fever pitch.
At 1 minute and 1 second, the song snippet is the shortest track on the record. It's also one of the few songs that feels like it belongs to the previous incarnations of the band. You could easily envision this fitting on Please Be Honest or one of the reunion LPs, whereas a track like It's Food or Packing the Dead Zone, which we'll get to in a few songs, really seems to belong to this new lineup. Pop Matters called this track one of Pollard's home-recorded surrealist numbers, lo-fi enough that they'd seem like mistakes if we didn't know better. And while it's not a great song, the second half doesn't sound too bad, and it's blended nicely right into the next song, Absent the Man. This is Mark Schu's first song on the record, and it, too, kicks ass. It's a nice, heavy track, and Mark's voice and playing fit in really well with the rest of the GBV material. This is not only important, but probably harder than it seems. For example, if you think back to the Rickett Wiki project, while I liked some of Nick Mitchell's songs, I found them a little jarring when placed next to Bob's. Whereas, on this first side, we have a song from both Mark and Doug, and they fit in really well alongside Pollard's tracks. Speaking of, Gillard provides a nice solo in this one. Last song on the first side is Packing the Dead Zone.
Packing the dead zone, but not just shopping. It's more like head hopping.
The placement of this song at the end of side one is a great bit of sequencing. Pollard began the record with an outstanding full band track, 5 Degrees on the Inside. His following 4 songs were mostly lo-fi affairs. Doug and Mark's tracks are really solid, and the first side then ends with this awesome track featuring the whole band. The voice at the beginning of the song, declaring that we're creating a society of cell phone-crazed, marijuana-smoking zombies, belongs to Stephen Stefanakis. He's listed in the liner notes as Detective Stephen Stefanakis, GBV PD. In addition to helming the official Twitter feed of the GBV PD, a division perhaps of the teenage FBI, it turns out he's indeed a detective. Stefanakis is a 28-year veteran of the NYPD, with 20 of those years being spent as part of the Emergency Services Unit. He's had a distinguished career in the force, including being a 9/11 first responder. He's also a huge GBV fan, going all the way back to the 90s when he heard the Vampire on Titus track, Expecting Brainchild, playing in an East Village record store. When he asked who the band was, and the clerk told him, Stefanakis wanted to buy the record, except that it was the clerk's personal copy. Undaunted, this is a New York City cop after all, Stefanakis offered to buy it anyway, eventually paying double the list price. After attending a bunch of GBV's shows in the New York area, Stefanakis eventually introduced himself to Mitch Mitchell and Pollard, striking up a friendship that's now lasted decades. And when Pollard was in town in 2016, recording August by Cake, he called Stefanakis, telling him, "I have a line for you, I'd love for you to say it." So Stephen went out to serious business in Brooklyn and ended up on the record. It's a fun way to open the song, especially when, after Pollard says, somberly, "Life is hard," Stefanakis answers back, "Ask easier questions." The entire track is super heavy and a lot of fun. When the band plays the song live, with Gillard shredding on guitar and Kevin March pounding on the drums, it's an absolute monster, and it's a great way to end side one. Side two kicks off with What Begins on New Year's Day.
Lights crawl away, splashing the window, a fresh view, primary flesh.
This simple, mostly acoustic track was actually written and recorded well before the August by Cake sessions, having originally been released as a Robert Pollard solo track in 2015 as part of an Amazon playlist that featured 25 bands and musicians writing new songs or offering new versions of holiday classics. The fact that this was once a Pollard solo song and yet now is a GBV track shows just how fluid the line is between the two, or if one even exists. Pollard's song appeared alongside others by artists such as Yacht, Langhorne Slim, and GBV fans Rogue Wave. Here's how Bob's contribution was described in marketing materials for the release. Over minimal acoustic guitar strums and electric guitar accents, the Guided by Voices legend explores what happens as the holidays wind down and regular day-to-day life begins again. A toast I'd make, he sings, to what begins on New Year's Day. Second song on side two is Overloaded. This is the first of 2 songs written and performed by drummer Kevin March, and man, is it good. It really is one of the best songs on the whole record, and not just when compared to the songs written by the other guys. It's up there, in my mind, with Bob's compositions on this LP or anywhere else. And when the drummer is coming up with gems like these, you know you have a strong lineup. March, however, unlike the other guys, had his songs already recorded and all ready to go, whereas the others had to scramble to write their songs for the album. As he says, after he sent the songs to Pollard, Bob came back and said, "You're done. I like them just the way they are." So I was really flattered and honored that he picked those 2 songs and thought they were done. In terms of whether or not a bit of Pollard had rubbed off on him over the years, March added, "I'm always influenced a little bit by Bob, just because he's an influential writer. I had written Overloaded a while ago, but I remember being inspired by the song Fair Touching, which is an old Guided by Voices song. The lyrics, though, seem to hint at another song from that same album, Unspirited, with March writing, I don't know which way to fall, feeling overloaded. You say I may be the cause. I don't know if I believe in me enough, feeling overloaded now." That's pretty heavy stuff, and yet it's a super fun and gorgeous song, with March sounding very much like Husker Du. It really is one of the best tracks on the LP, and probably, for me anyway, the album's biggest revelation. Third song on side 2 is Keep Me Down, slower version.
I have tried to leave every place now, but the wind just blew it all away now. Can't baby happen to choose you to keep you.
This is another recycled song, having first appeared almost 10 years before as a Boston Spaceships track off the 2009 record, The Planets Are Blasted. And since we've already seen a previously released Robert Pollard solo song become a GBV track, the fact that a Boston Spaceship song is remade as a GBV track only further reinforces the notion that Pollard can basically call anything he wants to be Guided by Voices. As cited in the track's subtitle, it's indeed slower than the original version, and Pollard's playing down the English accent he employed the first time around. It's also a more ragged version, with a guitar solo that seems pasted on from another song, but the sloppiness of the track actually gives it a lot of charm, with the cowbell making it feel like a barroom jam. Plus the line, I'm driven to you, I'm driven to drink, is pretty classic Pollard. Next up, Say Hello to the West Coast Company Man.
Out on the trail asking cold questions. Would you like to know how he came from Ohio? He's the West Coast Company Man.
This is a really fun song that has a few different parts, which is the kind of thing that didn't crop up much on the reunion LPs. The majority of those tracks were short and straight ahead, whereas this one tackles 3 different styles in under 2 minutes. With its talk about West Coast Company Man, it harkens back to Motivational Jumpsuit's Save the Company. And it does seem to be a remnant of Pollard's post-baby boomer Eisenhower upbringing. He was raised at a time where people got a job in a factory or a company, and that's pretty much all they did for the rest of their lives. Nowadays, you're expected to have lots of different jobs, and you're looked at askance if you stay at one place too long. But in the 50s and for most of the 60s, the opposite was true. The next song is Warm Up to Religion.
Why are they screaming? What did they win? A bucket of gravy, hammers and nails. Here's to the
First off, musically, this is a super fun song. It sounds really large and majestic, and by the end, it's practically a doo-wop song with its cooing background vocals. It sounds very much like the late 50s, early 60s era I mentioned when talking about the last track. The song's lyrics are also really interesting. Pollard's included a lot of religious imagery in his work, and again, I think these are an homage to his Midwest upbringing. Even recently, in a 2014 Pew survey, 57% of Ohioans said that they prayed daily, while 67% said they believed in God with absolute certainty. Bob, however, has always seemed, like he is about most things, a bit of a skeptic, something which shows in this song. For example, at the opening lines, which seem to be about Pollard stumbling into a church to witness an emotional and ecstatic scene, finds him asking, why are they screaming? What did they win? The mention a line later to hammers and nails could be taken as a reference to Christ's crucifixion. And what I find most interesting about the song is that, for as much as cynic as Pollard is, Warm Up to Religion finds him, well, warming up to the idea of worship and belief. He even suggests, maybe I'm in. It reminds me of John Lennon's Revolution, where he flirted with the idea of, well, revolution, saying in one version that you could count him both out and in. He was on the fence about it the same way that Bob's on the fence here. Later in the song, Pollard imagines his own conversion and presence in the activities, writing, "Why am I screaming? What did I win?" Even though he's now caught up in the moment, hollering for Jesus along with everyone else, he still can't quite shake the notion that the whole scene is sort of ridiculous. The last line of the track is total Pollard brilliance, Bob writing, "A happier face and stained glasses." Stained glass has been around for over 1,000 years and is often associated with churches and religious imagery. But with Pollard adding glasses instead of saying just glass, he's implying that he's wearing glasses with religious scenes right in the lenses, and that seeing the world this way has made him happier. He seems to be implying that religion can indeed lead to happiness, but only at the expense of surrendering your own individuality and blocking out anything that doesn't comport with the teachings of the church. Side 2 begins to wind down with High Five Hall of Famers. This is Bobby Bare Jr.'s first song on the record, and unlike Kevin March, who'd recorded his songs prior to Bob's request and had them all set to go, Bare Jr. was tasked to come up with the song in just a couple of hours. Given that that's the case, I'd say he did a pretty good job. The title refers to GBV because, as he says, we high-five a lot when we're out and we're laughing. A friend of mine would refer to restaurants he didn't want to go to and say, "There are way too many high-fivers there. I don't want to go hang out there." I never even thought of it as a thing. Still, my buddy pointed that out and I was like, yeah, we are high-fivers. And, of course, being in the Hall of Fame for high-fivers would appeal to Pollard because of his sports background. Second to last song on the second side is Sudden Fiction. This is Mark Schu's second song on the record. It's also a track that's been played extensively on tour, being performed often throughout tours in 2017 and 2018. It's a really fun song with some great guitar from Doug Gillard and, I must say, some nice drumming from Schu. Flood magazine wrote that the track has the hookiest guitars on the record and brings back memories of the band's brief major label stint on TVT Records. Last song on side 2 is Hiking Skin.
A singular net in most uncertain areas. How about you? How about me?
This is a super nice short song that sees Bob put in a pretty incredible vocal performance. The high note he hits on the line, "Be careful on the highway," has got to be his best singing voice since Cheyenne from Universal Truths and Cycles. The band also just sounds great, and it's a nice way to end side 2. However, what's really interesting about the track is that it has a long single guitar outro, which is essentially the opening to the first track on side 3, It's Food. This more or less knits those two sides together. It makes for a really fun experience when you listen to the record on vinyl, since it's a nice audio callback to what you just heard. This creates the illusion that you're hearing the two sides uninterrupted. On CD, or if you stream it, it just gives you a sense of déjà vu. Okay, so listen, we're now about halfway through the record, and I don't know about you, but I could use a break. So why don't we have a quick intermission? You can get a drink of water or make your sandwich or whatever, and I'll meet you back here in a few, okay? Cool. All right, we're back. However, before we dig into the second half of the album, let's look back at the first half. We had 16 songs with numerous tracks not written by Pollard, as well as a couple of Bob's usual lo-fi tracks, yet there's really not a song that I'd want to cut. I think the sequencing's spot on and there were some truly memorable songs. If the record ended here, I'd be pretty satisfied and I'd declare this a really fine LP. And yet we still have another 16 tracks to go. So then let's dive back in. Side 3 kicks off with It's Food.
Facing the stars and voices of angels, nourishing words to flesh and blood and bone.
I could have sworn I saw or heard Bob say that this was his favorite song on the record. If anyone remembers where that was, feel free to ping me. It's indeed a good track, with some really nice guitars and another nice vocal from Pollard. I also just like that you can hear some buzzing coming off of the amps in the quiet parts. It shows that the band's retaining some of their lo-fi spirit while also delivering songs that sound huge. Lyrically, there's a lot going on. Pollard writes, "It's down to the red team versus the blue team," and then later, "It's up to the old team versus the new team." These fairly arbitrary distinctions remind me of the litany of dichotomies Roger Waters offered up in Us and Them. Bob then asks, rhetorically, what must we do to survive, before arriving at the answer, which is, of course, food. We need to eat to survive. But it's not so simple as that. Pollard telling us that he's seen a world full of people, their bellies full of lies, of mystery meats and pies. He seems to be making a reference to the lies we tell ourselves in order to be okay with the large-scale industrialized slaughter of animals, not to mention the hypocrisy that comes with it, adding, we can kill them, but we can't film them. This is maybe a reference to those whistleblower films that sometimes emerge of gruesome industrial farm conditions. And then in the next line, we can them, but we can't scan them. Again, do you really know what's being jarred up and presented to you as food? This idea goes all the way back to the song Ambergris from 1990's Same Place the Fly Got Smashed, when Bob asked, "What's that you're eating? It might be misleading. You don't want to know." That's not to say that the track is heavy and not fun to listen to. This is not Meat is Murder. In fact, it also has some really fun Pollardian wordplay when he writes, "Indigenous jars will get you out of jams." It's a great song and a good way to open up side 3. Next up is Cheap Buttons.
10 million ring fans can't be all wrong. Target your audience and write them a song.
That first line there about 10 billion Ringo fans can't be all wrong is a reference to an Elvis Presley record that came out in 1959. It was a singles compilation officially named Elvis's Gold Records Volume 2. However, since at the top of the sleeve in big red type it says 50 million Elvis fans can't be wrong, that's what it's become to be known as. You'd probably recognize the cover if you saw it. It's the one that features a bunch of pictures of a young Elvis wearing a gold suit. German indie band Bloomfield would later use the same image, only with their heads on Elvis's body, for their 1994 record L'État et moi. And in 2004, there was a greatest hits record by The Fall, which cheekily nodded to their cult status by being named 50,000 Fall fans can't be wrong. The cover, of course, featured multiple pictures of a scowling Mark E. Smith wearing a jumper. And while it's funny that Pollard upped the Elvis number from 50 million to 10 billion, the fact that they're Ringo fans instead of, Paul or John, gives the line that much more charm. The next line, however, seemed to be more about GBV, Bob writing, "Target your audience, then write them a song." This reminds me of the line in Huffman Prairie Flying Field, "If that's what you want to hear, then that's what I will tell you." Indeed, the song seems to be about music and fandom, if not even a larger topic like politics. All you need to succeed is a cheap button and a catchy phrase that says something simple. We all want to feel that we have discerning taste, or that we think for ourselves. But in the end, all it takes is an inexpensive piece of tin pinned to someone's chest to make us change our minds. Pollard then delivers some really good lines, writing, "Like a good tattoo or permanent marker, some like it less, some like it darker." Really good bands, or even demagogues, know how to read an audience, and they can serve up their message as light or dark as the crowd wants. That's how they stay popular. But Bob's line about mass fandom does something more. He's indicting mob mentality, because of course 10 billion Ringo fans can be all wrong. If something sucks or is dangerous, it doesn't matter how many damn people like it. It still sucks and it's still dangerous. A number, no matter how large it is, doesn't bestow respectability on anything or anyone. In fact, it might just do the opposite. To quote Charles Bukowski, "The masses are always wrong. Wisdom is doing everything the crowd does not do. All you do is reverse the totality of their learning and you have the heaven they're looking for. Now that will make you warm up to religion." Third song on side 3 is Substitute 11.
Are no longer it. Can you settle them down?
This is a super interesting song, which is subtitled on the lyrics sheet, "An Educational Nightmare Teleplay." Pollard, of course, taught fourth grade for years, although by this point it had been more than 2 decades since he was a teacher. So the fact that the subject resurfaces here is pretty amazing. Plus, the format of the song, it's told in 2 parts, is really interesting. The first part's told from the point of view of a principal admonishing a substitute teacher for not controlling their classroom, while the second part is from the point of view of a director describing the scene of what happens to the hapless teacher as his day and maybe his life dissolves into chaos. It's a pretty remarkable song, perfectly capturing the essence and tone of an anxiety dream. And in its theatricality, it reminds me of some of the songs off of Tommy or Bowie's Space Oddity. It also makes me think that Pollard could, if he wanted to, pull off a rock opera or true concept album. Next up is Chew the Sand. This song, written by Mark Shue, is the longest track on the record at 3 minutes and 44 seconds. It's also my least favorite track on the album. That's nothing against Shue. He seems like a cool guy, and his other 2 contributions to this LP are truly stellar. But this one, it's pretty much just a meandering instrumental that Pollard shows up to sort of hum on top of. Doesn't do much for me. I'm not really sure why it was even included, except that Bob wanted the symmetry of 8 songs per side. Then again, this is Robert Pollard. The guy has boatloads of songs, so I don't understand why he didn't use something else in this song's place, because it really doesn't do much for the record as a whole, and it's not a lot of fun to listen to. Moving on, it's Dr. Feelgood Falls Off the Ocean.
Mechanical brains are invading my head power. Shadows that pass, breathing life in the night. I never can be what you want me to be now. The house plant is dying. I think it needs water. And if you could...
This co-write with Bob's brother Jim, the same as a few other tracks on the record, harkens back to the stripped-down sound of Please Be Honest, with most of the song consisting of just a drum machine, Pollard's voice, and a single electric guitar. Doug Gillard shows up late in the track to provide a nice solo, but by then the rest of the instruments are kind of out of sync and it's a bit disorienting. Spin Magazine wrote of the track, "There's a vaguely Celtic feel to the melody and backbeat, and like any other GBV song that's worth its salt, the band seems to be barely holding it together." But it's still a fun song, with some plaintive lines from Bob such as, "I can never be what you want me to be now," sitting right next to details of everyday life, Pollard telling someone, "The houseplant is dying, I think it needs water." The song ends with a nice bit of wisdom from Pollard, Bob writing, "If you could have any object desired, you'd grow tired." Again, just because you have a whole bunch of stuff and all your wishes come true, it doesn't mean you'd be happy. The title of the song is a reference to a British band who was big in the 70s called Dr. Feelgood. Of course, whether or not they ever fell off an ocean or how that would even happen, I have no idea. Side 3 begins to wind up with The Laughing Closet.
The sea hole witnessed by design is going to laugh about it. The 3-ring circus, the box office smashed.
This is a really pretty song, which sounds a lot like a Tobin Sprout track until Bob comes in with the vocals. It has some jangly guitar and nice drums. There's even some synth strings. It's good to see that this band, which could be really ferocious live, could also sound this tender and sweet on record. Although, for as sweet as the song is, the last line of it is "gathering black masses," which seems to be a reference to the opening line of Black Sabbath's War Pigs, generals gathered in their masses, just like witches at black masses. Second to last song on side 3 is Deflect, Project. This track, which is Doug Gillard's second song on the record, has some interesting things going on lyrically. In it, he's railing against a consumer's culture, as well as how people in power get away with the awful things they do. The lines, "resting in the Mediterranean, sending the taxman on the run," refers to people, oftentimes artists, who choose to live abroad in order to avoid paying taxes. The Rolling Stones did this in the early 70s, and British writer Anthony Burgess later did the same thing. There's also a number of lines that seem to be about gentrification and how the zero-sum nature of capitalism affects where and how people live, Gillard writing, "displacing a city one by one. once proud city now wrecked, and putting the renters on the dole being the British system of public assistance or welfare. The title of the song is basically the way the forces who are doing all this bad stuff protect themselves, by deflecting any criticism and instead projecting it back onto the person who's making the accusation. It's a classic defense mechanism of narcissists. It's also something the current president has spent pretty much every day in office doing. Late in the track, Gillard writes, "Evil things have come to light, tasting apples with parasites." The idea of an apple being a symbol of either death or downfall appears in contexts as varied as Sleeping Beauty in the Bible. But what Gillard's doing here is laying out something more subtle than that. The apple doesn't kill you, but without you knowing it, delivers evil that grows inside of you, unseen but always lurking. And if you try to confront it, all it will do is deflect and project. It's a pretty chilling vision. Last song on side 3 is Upon the Circus Bus.
Angry children begin to cut all in the same key.
This is Bobby Bare Jr.'s second song on the record. As he says, "I wrote the song acoustically while we were in Canada. I think we were in Montreal. I wrote it about a picture from the Rolling Stones Rock and Roll Circus, where I was taking everybody that was in the film. I just did a list of all the people and all the things that were in that." The song is just Bare Jr. singing and playing while there's ambient noise and discussion in the background, maybe the GBV tour bus. And whether or not he means to, the song connects the Rolling Stones' literal circus with GBV's own variation of it in real life. The sounds add a lot to the song. It'd feel pretty bare without it, no pun intended. And it gives the listener a good fly-on-the-wall feeling, the same as Lou Reed's song Kicks from Coney Island Baby, which employs the same technique. First song on side 4 is Try It Out, It's Nothing.
I'm just standing under, taking cover, fumbling zipper, dragging the stripper for a spin. Go for a win.
This short song begins like your standard rocking out GBV tune until some Beach Boys harmonies come in toward the end, along with Dennis Cronin again on the trumpet, both of which save the song from feeling like a throwaway. This is, after all, track 25 on a 32-track album. The song then segues into the second song on side 4, Sentimental Wars.
Sentimental wars, we are all fighting. Can we ever find the time to be alone?
This is Kevin March's second song on the record, and I have to say it's almost tied with Overloaded as being one of the best songs in the entire album. It's just a totally gorgeous track, hitting the same winsome and emotional territory that Tobin Sprout excelled at contributing to the group. The lyrics start with March asking a number of questions. Do you ever want it all? Do you ever find yourself? Do you ever want to be all alone? The song resolves with the sentimental wars of the title hopefully won, or at least over for now, with the narrator asking someone, "Just take my hand, I will be with you always." The final line of the song, "I've got this feeling inside of me," reminds me a lot of the line, "I'm waiting for that feeling" on the Blur track Tender, which mines a similar territory both lyrically and musically. And on an LP stuffed with references to circuses, religion, and politics, it's nice to get what appears to be a simple love song. It's just an absolutely outstanding track, and I really hope we'll get a Kevin March solo record one of these days. Third song on side 4 is Circus Day Holdout.
Circus Day holdout, spoiling the show. Circus Day holdout.
This song tells of, well, a Circus Day holdout. Someone, maybe one of the several clowns that have been referenced elsewhere on the album, who refuses to perform. He says, after declaring that life isn't fair, to tell the guys, presumably his co-workers at the circus, that even though he's leaving, he still cares. And his final kiss-off is the sort of the big top version of "Take this job and shove it," the narrator saying as a not-so-fond farewell. "Crank up your monkey and organ without me." Basically, do whatever the hell you want, I'm out of here. It's a pretty funny line, and it fits in with the kind of statements that Paul has been making for decades. For example, "I speak in monotone, leave my fucking life alone." Moving on, it's Whole Tomatoes.
He came to the river of razor blades. Noticed them boating.
At a minute and 12 seconds, this is the second shortest of the album's 32 tracks. Pop Matters called the song absolutely gorgeous, imagistic nonsense. I agree with that. I also think that Pollard wrote it after a visit to the grocery store where he lingered an awfully long time in the produce section. The next track is Amusement Park is Over.
Avoiding conditions and excellent bypass. And crashing tradition.
This is a nice song that sits sort of in the middle of the stark sound Pollard had produced for Please Be Honest and the lush and heavy full band stuff found elsewhere on this record. It's basically just Pollard at Cybertechnics, except Doug Gillard adds some extra guitar parts that really bring the track to life. He's a super talented guy who always seems to know what to add to Bob's songs. I can't tell from the lyrics what the song's about, but the appearance of an amusement park in the title ties it to the circus imagery found elsewhere on the album. The record starts to wind up with Golden Doors.
Risk the city, all of the steel. The agency called, they want my prince.
This is a super spare song that features just Pollard and a slowly strummed guitar. It's pretty lo-fi and harkens back to the more stripped-down songs on the reunion LPs. It doesn't have too much of a tune, but it's decently short at under 2 minutes, so it doesn't really wear out its welcome. If the majority of the tracks sounded like this, I wouldn't be as much of a fan of this record, but since out of 32 tracks, only a couple sound like this, I really don't mind. Second to last song on the record is The Possible Edge.
It's cheap and somewhat vain, but you gotta read the labels, then you would know that you might have the possible.
This is another nice track that showcases a really great vocal performance by Pollard. The song's subject seems to be, well, how you can gain an edge and how that edge, presumably over someone else, will put what you wish to obtain within reach. The character Jake, in the Orson Welles film The Lady from Shanghai, describes having an edge as being simply something the other guy ain't got. For example, a set of brass knuckles, a stripe on the sleeve, a badge that says cop on it, a rock in your hand, or a bankroll in your pocket. That's an edge, brother. Last song on the record is Escape to Phoenix.
The lost guy out of the world wants to break in and tell you where to go.
This stomper of a track has an almost glam vibe. Author Nicholas Carr wrote that the song feels like the missing link between the Velvet Underground and the Bay City Rollers, adding, I'm not sure it was a link that needed to be discovered, but it does end this fun and satisfying album with a rush. I agree, it's a fun song, especially since the last 20 seconds of it are taken up with a group of voices repeating the rebellious refrain from Circus Day Holdout, Crank Up Your Monkey and Organ Without Me. It gives the impression that, after the solo nature of Please Be Honest and the increasingly fractured fraternity of the reunion albums, that GBV is back to being what it was always meant to be, a team, a gang, a bunch of buddies drinking beer and cranking out righteous tunes. The boys are back in town, and the results are amazing.
Crank up your monkey and organ without me.
Okay, that's it for the show. In 2 weeks, we'll have the second to last episode of the series, answering the eternal question, how do you spell heaven? I'm pretty sure it's H-E-A, forget. Instead, let's now hear another song from next month's tribute record. This is The GBVBs by the Kyle Sowashes. See you in 2 weeks.